I hope I am live for you all. So, hello, my name is Brianna. I am the Assistant Director at the Leadership Institute here at Columbus State University. And welcome to our first Disruptive Leadership webinar of the year. Happy New Year to all of you all. During our time together, we want to make this very interactive. So we will be using the Q&A feature, and I will pause our speaker Nico throughout for him to address those questions. You can also submit your questions to me directly by sending me a message in the chat. And today's webinar will be facilitated by Nico Moyer. So Nico is a diversely trained and qualified coach in the Columbus area. Nico has 7 years of experience in the special ops community with the 75th Ranger Regiment. He holds a bachelor's degree in interpersonal and relational communication. He recently completed his graduate studies in organizational leadership, specializing in leadership development at the William B. Turner Center for Servant Leadership at CSU. Nico is a professional certified coach trained by the Academy of Creative Coaching. Nico supports Rangers in transition as a mentor with the Three Rangers Foundation. He serves as an adjunct professor for the William B. Turner Center for Servant Leadership. And most importantly, he enjoys time with his wife, Claire, and their two dogs, Pancake and Peach. And with that being said, I will now open the Q&A and turn it over to Nico. Please help me welcome him in the Q&A chat. And Nico, I am turning the floor over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I will begin to share my slides here, and just thank you, Bree, for such an incredible introduction. You always feel great when you're introduced by Bree and you're just ready to go. So I am absolutely excited to be here. Like Bree said, I have a lot of different and varying backgrounds of experience. I also most recently am a city minister for a college and young adult ministry here in Columbus. So I'm constantly getting to talk about different soft skills, different personal and professional development topics, and especially what we're going to talk about today, which is building our foundation, specifically around our ethics, our values, and our morals. Like I said, I'm currently a city minister with an organization called Second Story, and something really cool about that is that I have complete autonomy. I really get a lot of freedom to do what I think we should do, to be a good steward of those things. The other side of that, though, is that I need to understand where I stand. What is my foundation? What do I believe in? What are my values? What are those ethics and morals guiding me? Because I don't necessarily have a supervisor or even a peer with me throughout the day to help keep me in line. So for me personally, self-awareness, ethics, a lot of understanding our personalities, it really is the most important thing that we could pour into. Building our own foundations, filling our own toolbox is really how we set ourselves up to be successful in the future and to be trusted and entrusted with more and more responsibilities. So I'm really excited to jump in today. I know we have a lot of people from different places. I know that some people will watch this recording later. Please jump in the chat. Even if you're watching the recording, comment on there. I'll jump back on there and look at it. I am happy to get engaged back and forth with y'all. But let's jump in because, we're on lunch. I know you guys are doing this in between everything else. So I'm ready to dive into this and super excited. So just kind of laying out the general flow of what we'll cover today. We'll obviously have to define, describe, and try to differentiate between values, morals, and ethics. Try to understand generally how we can measure that ethical behavior. I think already we're thinking, well, a lot of different people have a lot of different perspectives on this. And that's something that we'll talk about based on culture and other factors. We also want to think about how to select the appropriate measure of ethical behavior based on the desired outcome or based on what we hope to accomplish in that interaction or based on that ethical dilemma. And then I hope to provide with you all a nice little framework that you can use when making ethical decisions. And we'll finish with a great activity where we'll actually start to build our own personal code of ethics to help prepare us for entering the workforce, for combining our code of ethics with the employers that we may be working with already, and just getting everything integrated smoothly. So I want to ask a quick question. I loved growing up and watching What Would You Do? And I don't want to say his name completely wrong, but it's John Quinones, I believe. And it's just an interesting show, one of those reality shows where they hide the cameras in a restaurant or in some public space, and they intentionally entrap unsuspecting victims candidly by presenting some type of ethical dilemma. It may be some form of discrimination. It may be just a young child disrespecting their grandparents, from funny to very serious different scenarios. But what's interesting is seeing just how all of the people who are not actors or who are not on the show decide to engage in that situation. Sometimes we're uncomfortable and we turn a blind eye. Sometimes we might want to defend the underdog and step up and stand up for those people. But ultimately, what determines that, or what determines which direction we go, is where we stand, what our views are around our personal ethics and values and morals. And if we don't think about that, when that situation arises, we're not going to know what to do. But if we start to kind of visualize, or we think about scenarios that we may come in contact with based on the industry we work in, based on the communities we're engaged in, then we can be a little bit more prepared when those situations arise, to be prepared to take a more active role or a more confident approach in however we want to handle that situation. So drop in the chat, the Q&A, whether you're looking at the recording. Let me know if you've ever watched What Would You Do? Let me know what your favorite episodes are. And if you've never seen it, jump on YouTube and go check it out, because it's really, really fascinating and incredibly interesting to see just how everybody handles some of these very targeted situations.
And Nico, I will jump in and let you know I was over here going down a nostalgic lane because that show has been on for years, and I remember watching that with my mom growing up, and we would have these conversations and debates regarding whatever the topic was. Like you said, there's some that are lighthearted, but there are some more serious ones. But wherever you can try to catch those, whatever you stream through, whether that's Hulu or Netflix, make sure you try to catch one of those episodes. It's a good way to kind of practice what we're talking about, and I think will further drive home that message. So thanks for bringing that up, Nico.
Absolutely, and honestly, what a perfect transition, because like you said, you watch that and you think, why would they do that? Or why would somebody not stand up for that? And then you realize, as other people are watching it with you, that what we would do isn't always what everybody else would do, because we do in fact have at least different values. And even further, we sometimes have different morals and ethics as well. So I'm excited to hopefully shed some light into why we can sometimes be disagreeing, even though none of us might be wrong. So dictionary.com simply defines values as a person's principles or standards of behavior, one's judgment of what is important in life. I think values is kind of the easiest stepping stone for most of us. We've learned about values at least a little bit at home. In child rearing, as we grew up, we start to learn, hey, what's right and wrong? Because the values really are how we make decisions about what is right or wrong. And it really does help guide and show others what's most important to us. So sometimes you'll see some of these red words down here, these kind of buzzwords, and there's so many, right? The list goes on. And in fact, some will overlap between values and morals, or morals and ethics. So don't think that this is a all-inclusive list or a mutually exclusive list. But some of my favorites: altruistic, dependable, transparent, acceptance, honesty, family, sustainability. So those are generally some of the words that you'll hear around values. Those things that are pretty unique to the individual, although can be generally and broadly accepted by others in our communities, or others who follow the same or live within the same culture as us. Slightly different. And right now I'm just kind of we're going to go values, morals, ethics, and then we'll look at a side by side, because I know each one makes a lot of sense when we're in it. And then when somebody says, so wait, which one's morals? All of a sudden we kind of lose it, and it's convoluted waters. So I'll try to help clarify that once we get through each of the three. So morals are defined as a person's standard of behavior or beliefs concerning what is and is not acceptable for them to do. So this typically has a much more social implication, and generally they're more broadly accepted. So while values might change from household to household, or even between me and my sister and my dad and my brother, generally from a moral standpoint, we're going to be pretty close on the same page. And most of my neighbors are going to be generally close to being on the same page. Although, as we know, because you could turn on the news and at any given time see two parties fighting. I don't want to say parties, I don't mean that in a political sense. Two different groups opposing one another in terms of what is right or wrong. And sometimes we see that billboard and it starts with, you know, a turtle and ends with a human, and it says, where do you draw the line? And, you know, I have a lot of friends who are vegan or vegetarian, some because of their values and ethics and morals, others for dietary restrictions. So it's not always black and white. It's not always a simple, clean line. And that's why we have to be intentional about understanding where we stand so that we can understand how that impacts our relationships and our social opportunities for fellowship. We do tend, however, to judge others a little bit more strongly on morals than values. If somebody maybe their value is not transparency, we might extend a little bit of grace. That might be okay. Hey, they're just not as open as me. If somebody, however, consistently is unhonest or they're lying often, that might be judged a little bit more harshly by most of us. And that's a pretty generally accepted view, at least here in the United States. So with morals, again, still close to values, but we're getting a little bit broader in terms of acceptance and a little bit more stringent in terms of our expectation for others to follow this. We look at things like respect and honesty and cooperation. Honesty again, because I wrote it twice. And then here's a little question mark, corporate social responsibility. Most of y'all in here now are in the corporate world or working in that post-collegiate career. How do you feel about that? We go back and forth in higher education. What is it? How do we define it? What are corporations actually responsible for in terms of social issues? And that's just a question to ponder. That's something to think about. Because is that immoral? Is it ethical? Or is that just a value that some corporate or organizations hold? Just a little question to ponder there. I still go back and forth, even with some of the instructors here at CSU. So ethics can sometimes be one of those words where as soon as you say, everybody kind of gets cold and, all right, where are we going? Are we going to fight today, or are we going to have a loving conversation? Don't worry, we're still going to be friends here and we're going to get through this. So ethics are all about the moral principles that govern, and govern's really important in there, a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. So morals or ethics are the morals that really start to govern how we do things. You start to see them codified, right? It's a law that I have to treat others a certain way. I cannot physically get into an altercation. That's a codified moral that I will respect the well-being and safety of others. And it's a set of rules which are explicitly adopted by a group. So it might not be a law, but perhaps in your organization, equity and fairness is a moral that's been adopted as an ethic for your organization. That would be explicitly stated in your company's code of ethics, in your employee handbooks, maybe in your initial processing into the organization. So again, ethics, that really separates from morals when you start to see that codified and explicitly adopted system integrated. Typically, it's internally defined and adopted by groups, while morals tend to be more externally imposed. So the ethics, we might say, here's some morals that we see, and we want to adopt this in our organization. We're going to codify that. We're going to keep that as part of our code of ethics here, and now it's been internally defined and adopted. That could be environmental concerns. I know that in my organization, we're doing a big sustainability push right now. So one of the ethics or one of the morals that we're adopting is that we're going to try to be more sustainable. We're going to offer recycling opportunities. We're going to offer multi-use, drinking containers so that we're avoiding single-use plastics. And that's something that we as an organization want to adopt, although that may not be something that's adopted by all organizations surrounding us. Sometimes it may be that we're law-abiding, right? I think for most of us, it's pretty ethical, or we consider it ethical to follow the law. Now, what the laws are, we might have some conflicting views, and that's why we have to, vote and be an active member in our communities. Equity and fairness, that's a big one that we talk about a lot, and honesty. So again, honesty, a lot of those things where one might describe somebody's character, we can see those in values, ethics, and morals. And here's kind of all that mess in one nice, pretty snapshot, because again, there is a connection here, but it also can be very convoluted the deeper we get. And if you jump online, you could fall into a rabbit hole for days, which is why I have a nice PowerPoint here and I'm trying to keep it nice and concise. So typically, most people would suggest that ethics, values, and morals determine the attitude in which we carry. So if my ethics, values, and morals are that I'm going to be an upstanding citizen, I'm going to be open, honest, and transparent, and I am a lover of animals. That should generally guide how I interact throughout the day, how I carry myself, what my attitude is, and others should, through my actions, be able to see some of those values, ethics, and morals being carried out. This little blurb towards the bottom here was really interesting. I got this from Courtney Wilson at the William B. Turner Center for Servant Leadership, but ethics are the application of our morals, which are the application of our values. So you kind of see that our values really feed into our morals and morals into our ethics. And if you look at the side-by-side to the right of the screen, you have your values, as we talked about, some of those principles and ideals. They help us really make judgment. They help us decide what's important. Some of those could be power and reputation and responsibility and honesty. And that drives forward and starts to form the values and are the actual systems that we use in order to define what those core values are. And then ultimately, those ethics really are the principles that are going to guide not only ourselves, but the groups we're a part of. And I say groups
that you brought up, sorry, Nico, to interrupt. I love how you describe values. It really is something that is customized to that individual, and it doesn't necessarily match your environment. So, I think that the way you described it, our rights and our wrongs show what we value as individuals. So I love that you used it in that phrase. And for me, I value my alone time. I really, really do. I value it. I put it on a pedestal. I love it. But and that, it relates to my attitude. And a lot of the times, where I want to shut my door at work because I love being alone. But that might necessarily not translate as far as attitude goes to my other coworkers. They could, that could affect my attitude in a negative way. But that was just something that I wanted to say, because values, I really think it is about, what you think is right. And I think that it is right. Everyone should have alone time.
Absolutely. And that's exactly the point, right? Is that the values, sometimes it is stuff that isn't about life and death or equity or some big, very sensitive topic. Sometimes it's, hey, I appreciate having 20 minutes in the morning for my morning kind of breathing exercise and meditation. But that's something that I value, and that really leads itself into other areas. And I love that you mentioned, you put it on a pedestal, and I wonder if it's in your calendar too, because a lot of times what we tell our clients when we're coaching is Show me your calendar and I'll show you what you value. Right now, some of us, we might just not be calendar people and we're not big on that. But for those of us that do, you can really see what people value based on how they block off their time. If I'm only blocking off my time for work on my calendar, but I'm not putting in dinner with my wife and being intentional to get her flowers from time to time, then what would somebody think when they're looking at my calendar? Oh, this guy's all about work. He values work, right? So really those values, yeah, can be perceived and received from others in many different ways. Now, just like emotional intelligence or self-awareness or anything else, it's not that anyone is right or wrong, but now once we know that, I'm sure, Bree, that you can communicate more effectively with others and say, hey, my door is always open to you, even if it's slightly closed for a little bit of quiet time, right? So there's ways that we can, our self-awareness of our values and our understanding of what our foundations are can help us communicate more effectively with the people we work with.
Yes, for sure.
Now we get into some fun stuff. So that's big picture stuff, and that really is good. And I highly urge y'all to go back to this and to kind of touch base here and there, because it is hard to keep the world of ethics and values and morals in line. Even in the last year, you can turn on the news and see debates back and forth and conversations about what really is ethical or what is moral or this is immoral. And we're constantly evolving as a country, as a world of people. So sometimes these things evolve and change as well, and we have to understand what we're talking about so that we can understand the landscape as it begins to change. So right here I have a few approaches, and I've got 3 more on the next slide. This is not all the approaches to measuring ethical behavior. If you guys want to jump online later, you can. If you guys think of some right now, absolutely throw it in the chat. Let us know some of your favorite approaches, but we'll cover some of the big ones here. And these are based off of an article with a framework of moral decision making with Velasquez et al. So this is something that we use with students, just this general framework and some of these. And then I've added a few more in there that I just really enjoy. So the utilitarian approach really is about considering the various courses of action. So you start by considering what are the courses of action I could take based on whatever thing I'm assessing, whatever ethical behavior I'm trying to look at. Now, in making that decision, I have to ask myself who would be affected and what benefits or consequences will be derived from which decisions I use. Now, under the utilitarian approach, whichever ethical decision is the one that provides the greatest good for the greatest number is the one that we would use. I don't know if any of you have seen the show Scorpion, but it's basically a group of geniuses that fight the world, and you know, silly like any other show, but they talk constantly about greater good theory and making sure that whatever decision they make is for the greatest good. Now that sounds great. It sounds, got it. Why don't I use that for everything? Well, in, you know, a game scenario, if you had to kill one person to save 50, would you do it? We don't know, right? I hope nobody's ever put in that situation. But does it change as the number changes? 500 for 5 million? So those are things that we have to think about. Another approach is the rights approach. Does the action violate the rights of anybody? So when implementing a decision, if what I'm going to do violates the right of others, I have to be careful. So if I have somebody who needs religious accommodations and I continue to schedule a meeting during those times that they should be allowed to use that, would that be violating some of their rights? Perhaps. It's something to think about. So with the rights approach, we want to pick whichever action does not violate anyone's rights. Common good approach is similar to utilitarian or the greater good. So while respecting and valuing the freedom of individuals to pursue their own goals, the common good approach challenges us to also recognize and further goals that we share. So that's the decision that best supports myself, the Leadership Institute, and y'all, all those viewing, all of those taking in this content, for me to choose something that would satisfy our shared goals would be me implementing the common good approach. A big one that we hear about and really have for the last several years as we continue to challenge society's equity and inclusion and you know, universal human values is the fairness or justice approach. Does it treat everyone the same way without showing favoritism or discrimination? There's a lot of times that we see people trying to implement the appropriate decisions or the appropriate actions to safeguard their organizations and their people, but sometimes inadvertently, we might be showing favoritism. We might be forming in and out groups, or we might worse be discriminating against others that we work with. So we have to be really careful to observe that. As you'll start to notice, some of these can be combined. Some of these approaches can be used within one another or side by side to really hone in and become as efficient as possible in making these ethical decisions. And then the professional ethics standard, that's pretty basic. Hey, based on the industry you're in, if there was an impartial jury of your peers, of other professionals in your field, would they agree with the decision you made? This would be really important in finance, medical fields, those fields that already have a professional ethics standard. As a professional certified coach, I follow the code of ethics from the International Coaching Federation, right? So I can use this measure to apply to anything that I do and say, if I were to show my fellow coaches this action or how I decided to handle this, would they agree that I chose the right behavior? And now here's some three kind of approaches that I really enjoy, because I'm a big fan of visualization to begin with, but I think that removing the veil and kind of playing out different scenarios can be really beneficial in helping us develop our critical thinking skills and specifically our ability to measure ethical behavior. So the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have done unto you. Basically, treat others the way you want to be treated. I like to take that a step further and treat others the way you want to be treated when you're treating yourself the best you should, right? I think we all know that sometimes we tell others to take breaks and then we don't take breaks, and we're not always loving ourselves as much as we should. So with that rule, I say treat others the way you want to be treated when you're treating yourself with love. Categorical imperative, that's kind of the idea that if everybody were to do this thing, this behavior, would we still function? Would we still exist? If we deleted just a handful of national and federal laws, right, would we still be able to function as a society? I speculate not, depending on what those are, but that's a really good way to consider the repercussions of the actions that we take. And one of my favorites, this comes in many different names, the 60-minute test, the grandma test, the newspaper test. Basically, would you feel at ease describing your behavior on television in front of millions of viewers? Or if somebody were to write a newspaper article about the behavior that you were conducting, would you be okay if grandma read that? Would you still be all right at Sunday dinner to have a conversation and not feel embarrassed? So I'd like y'all to think about kind of if any of those are ones you've used, if there's others that you've used, and what your favorite or what the most successful approach has been for you in your time. I think it'd be really helpful not only to see which ones of these some of y'all like, but also for others to see some additional measures that maybe they haven't heard of before.
And Nico, if you could go back to that slide, I really like that we put some names, some formal titles to all of these different approaches, because for me, I mean, yes, I always want to prevent, that anybody feels discriminated against or prevent in and out groups. So yes, fairness and the justice approach, that is one that I would, particularly use. And then being trained as a coach, when I'm having these coaching relationships and I'm working with coaching clients, having those professional code of ethics in mind, and making sure that I'm living those out. And the golden rule, I think that's another one that I can relate to. It's oldie but goodie. I have, grown up hearing this phrase, but would I want it to be done to me? I think that when it comes to me dealing with ethical issues, for me, that's the first thing I would go to. Is that how I would want to be treated? Is that how I would want them to communicate with me? And I know you can't use that for everything, the golden rule, because you have to take into consideration that there's people who have different preferences than you. But that is something that when it comes to trying to figure out if something is, ethical or unethical, I just try to put it back on myself and would I want that to be done to me? And the new one that I haven't heard before is the 60-minute test. I like that.
Okay.
I don't think I would do a lot of things if I had to have that conversation with my grandma on Sunday at the dinner table. So I think that's a new one that I'm adding to my toolbox, y'all.
Absolutely. And that's what's so interesting, right? Is that what happens once we start to develop this, whether we build out a whole framework and, a flow chart, or we just sit in here and listen and just absorb this information, is that now we start getting tools and we find which ones we like, which ones are applicable. And before you know it, not only do you have kind of this flow that you can go through to make those decisions, you also will just naturally become more intentional. Right? If only the 60-minute test, if that's the only takeaway for today, imagine how many of your actions change throughout today and tomorrow and the next day, right? Oh, I should have held that door. Oh, I should have been more patient with that guy that was having a tough day, right? We start to think about all of our actions, and you almost, for me, it feels like grandma's sitting right here just watching me all day now. So it really helps keep me in line, even when I'm tired, even when I'm frustrated, even when I forget where I am, or if I'm a little bit off balance for the day. So yes, I absolutely love those as tools. And that's why I love to hear everybody else's input too, and just see so many different measures that people have found that work for them. And what happens as we start to understand our foundation and we start to find some of these tools is that we could build out that framework. And this is, again, the framework that's offered by Velazquez. But naturally, you'll tweak this to your own based on the tools, the measures, and the outcomes that you are experiencing. So these are the steps, and we'll kind of step into each one quickly. Not too long there, because then the next part's my favorite. I'm super excited to get to it, but we need to understand our framework first. So the first step is really recognizing that an ethical issue exists. And that's what's so fascinating to me about What Would You Do? Is that sometimes the reason people are not taking an active role in correcting ethical issues, both on a hidden camera show and at work and in our everyday life, is that we just don't recognize it's there. We're just not seeing it, or somebody's not telling us. So we need to be attentive to recognizing that these issues may exist and do in fact exist all over the place. So as we do so, could this decision or situation be damaging to someone or some group, right? If it can be, we really have to reconsider what we're doing. Does the decision involve a choice between a good and a bad alternative, or two goods and two bads? I know a lot of y'all are probably sitting there like, I've been in the too bad situation, right? Which option do I pick? Worse or worser, right? So sometimes we have a good and a bad, sometimes it's two goods, sometimes it's two bads, and each of those creates a unique opportunity for us to try to figure out where we stand on that situation. And is the issue more than what is legal, or is it more about what's most efficient, right? In organizations, especially like during post-COVID or even during COVID, right? We're needing to make money, but we also have, in my view, some ethical and moral considerations for the people that are in these workforces and people who are ill. And I mean, there were so many ethical decisions and conversations during COVID that I think in 10 years, it's going to be an incredible example to look back on in terms of what we did really well and what we did really poorly. But when we have legal confines or boundaries within our organization, and we have efficiency goals or profit goals, we really have to balance what's more important. And the only way we can do that is by having our own code of ethics, and as an organization laying out what's acceptable and what is not. Once we recognize that there is an ethical issue, once we recognize that there's something going on that maybe we need to address, we really have to get the facts. And that should be common sense, but for all of us, there's times where we just see something, we see red, or we want to fix the situation, we want to help somebody in need, and we forget that we need to get the facts first. So what are those relevant facts? Can I learn more about the situation before making a decision? Or do I already have enough to make a decision? What are the different options for action? What are some of the concerns that might be important for me to consider? And here's one that we forget: we're not alone, right? Most of us, if we're at work, we at least have one other peer or one superior or subordinate that we can work with. So I've really pulled in all those relevant persons and groups and consulted them. Have I asked them for their input? And at that point, have we identified some creative options for moving forward? We have to identify multiple options because, as we know, the first option isn't always the best option. And if it is, lucky us for that day. So thinking about that, let's evaluate a few alternative actions from various perspectives. So which option, based on some of the ones that we talked about before, would produce the most good and the least harm? I'll give you guys just a second to think about that. If you're here live, you can drop it in the chat. If you're watching our recording, feel free to comment. But that would be the utilitarian approach. Remember, most good and least harm. That's our utilitarian approach. And then we've got which option best represents the rights to all who have a stake. So that's really thinking about everybody. And the key word here is rights. So that would be our rights approach. And I won't do each of these. These are just things for you all to consider. Let's move down to the second to last one. Which option looks the most like the kind of behavior we hope to see from everyone in our society? Who can think of what that one is? Categorical imperative. And then one of our favorites, which option leads me to act as the sort of person I want to be? That's our 60-minute test, right? Thinking about Grammar reading that newspaper article, or millions of viewers hearing about what I've just done. And I think about that even when I'm coming into a webinar or when I'm walking into a coaching session. Is this something that I would be excited to share with anybody? Of course it is, because I'm excited to be here and I love that y'all are here with me. But if I'm not thinking about that, it's really hard to keep that and to remain intentional about that. And then we have to decide and test. So once we've looked at all those different options and we're like, okay, maybe the rights approach, the common good approach, and the 60-minute test will all work, which one's really the best? Which approach should I apply? And we consider all those options and we pick that. And we think, if I told someone I respect, or if I told a radio audience which option I have chosen, what would they say? And now we get to act. So once we start to implement that, like anything else, we have to follow through. We have to observe the effects of what we've done. So as we act and reflect, we have to think about how my decisions can be implemented with the greatest care and attention to all those involved, right? I recently took over an organization that's been thriving for 7 years. I cannot just come in and change everything. There needs to be time. I need to take care and attention to the fact that we already have an audience who has an expectation, and they're stakeholders in that organization. So there's certain ways that I would implement things. And the same could be said about ethical decision making and the measures that we apply. And then we have to think, as we've implemented it and we start to see the effects or the consequences, is how did my decision turn out? And what have I learned from this specific situation? Because we know that if we don't follow up and we don't go full circle, we won't know if we were successful or not. And if we're addressing an ethical situation, I believe that we want closure or reconciliation as soon as and as effectively as possible.
And I think that going full circle, Nico, that's important because it prepares us for the future decision making. A lot of times we may struggle with coming to a decision on ethical issues because it's time sensitive. So having that time to reflect after you have made the decision and kind of bring it back full circle, it is building that muscle. It is preparing you to, flex that muscle the next time you're faced with an ethical decision.
Absolutely. And as a leader, we kill psychological safety when we don't follow through with that. Just imagine if somebody's coming to you as a leader with something that makes them ethically uncomfortable, and we don't go full circle and make sure that we see through to a successful reconciliation of that person's work, their comfortability at work, their relationships at work are all going to be diminished, and that's going to affect the culture of our entire organization. And speaking of culture, as we jump in to my favorite activity and our closing activity of personal code of ethics, I do want to mention briefly culture. Culture plays a huge part in our values, ethics, and morals. I did not put too many slides in here about that because that could be its own entire presentation, but we have to understand that different cultures hold different values, and different cultures oftentimes can have different morals and ethics as well. So what behavior is acceptable can change between the North and the South, between the US and Canada and Central America, but also even just North Columbus and South Columbus. I live more by the lake bottom area, and I have friends that live up by the north side area, and just even the speed of life is slightly different. So there's different things that we value and different things that we hold really close to our hearts, and culture is a huge impact on that. And culture is as small as the groups that we hang out with and as big as the state and country that we may live in. So definitely something to consider there and something to think about. So now let's jump into our own personal code of ethics. This is an exercise that I was blessed with from a business law instructor 4 years ago. We did it in class. I loved it so much. I begged him that if I could use it, and I use it with my coaching clients. I have it on my website, and today we're going to use it here for a little bit as well. And what we're going to do is really just start to understand what do we stand for, so that way we can begin to build our code of ethics. So I'll move generally slow through these top 3, but you have a few extras, so that way after this webinar you could jump in. But some of the things I want you to think about, and I'll share a few of my examples. The first one is, who am I? And the way that we can extrapolate that a little bit, because this can be a 1-hour activity or it can be a 6-month activity if you want to, meditate on it or let it kind of settle. But who am I? So what I want you to do is write, and you could do 1 or 2 right now. You don't have to do all 10, but I want you to work up to 10 statements beginning with I am. Super simple. You don't have to overthink it. You don't have to be poetic. For me, I am human. I'm a veteran. I am an avid learner. I am broken because I'm human. I am flawed. I am a protector of the underdog. Those were some of my I ams when I did this. And you could go on forever. I'm sure you could come up with a lot of I ams. But the reason that I want you to do 10 is because those 10 are going to be ones that kind of came to you immediately. And then later you could narrow it down to 3, which is much more difficult, but really helps to shine some light on what your top 3 I ams are. And then the same thing with what do I value? And with what do I value, I want it to start with I value, whatever that is, and why, and because. So for example, I value honesty because I've seen deceit, right? I'm a little bit poetic with it. I'm a nerd when I dive into these activities. I value love because everyone deserves it. I value Claire because she's my rock. That's my wife. I value all people because they are of great worth. So obviously I'm a relationship person. I'm highly social on Emergenetics. So a lot of my values are around my relationships and the connectedness that I believe that we have as peoples. So think about a few of yours. Again, working up to 10 over time, and then trying to narrow those 10 down to 3 to 5. And then what do I believe? Same thing, we're working towards 10, and I believe that. And a few of mine, again, I'm just on my website pulling this up because I've shared it. I love this activity. I believe the mind is our most powerful tool. I believe that respect is earned, but is given in the interim. That's big. That's a big part of my values. I believe that hard work supersedes natural talent, and I believe that I am in control of my own life. Right. So some of these things can be kind of fun and silly, but really speak to who we are as people. And some of them can be really deep and emotional and even feel vulnerable to share sometimes. So I'm not encouraging you to post this on Facebook or on a website like I have. But these are great tools that you can use. And after you do those three, if you come into what experiences taught me, and again, I help you with I've learned that, what are my expectations of others, in my interactions with others, I expect them to, and what inspires me, I am inspired by, something of that sort. What happens is you end up with this page of just really great one-liners of things that you value, things that you really believe, things that are really, really planted onto your heart. And then you can convert those statements into your own personal code of ethics. Whether you want that to be a general narrative, like a paragraph, or if you still want to keep it as statements, the way that we have it set up here. And why is that important? Why is building our own code of ethics even important? Why go through the trouble of this activity? Well, because then we could live our code of ethics. Then we know what's guiding us. And when something comes up that's not on there, we have more of our mental bandwidth to commit to that, right? But if we don't think about it, when we're presented with those situations, we're going to be at a loss for what to do. But also, then you could share with others what your personal code of ethics are. And the people that work with you, the people that interact with you daily can start to understand that I'm also like Bree, and sometimes I like my quiet time. And that might not be an ethic in terms of who I am, but I might believe that rest is incredibly important for me to best serve the people that I'm working with. And that's how I want to communicate that to others. And then also we're able to combine our personal code of ethics with the understanding of what our professional code of ethics are, whether that's our workplace code of ethics or whether, like coaching, you're within an industry that also provides another layer of ethic or ethical guidelines for somebody. And then this could also help you develop your own little team code of ethics. You might have a code of ethics at your organization or at your corporation, but you also may work in a really intimate 5-person team or small group. And you may want to develop your own code of ethics that help y'all continue to support one another and make sure that ethical decision making is happening. And then ultimately, with all of this, it's the what do I do next? Where do I go? Well, once you do those things, we just have to continue to expand our ethics toolbox. Our toolbox is in terms of self-awareness, growth, and what our ethical stance is. And of course, we'd always love to help with that. We love talking with y'all through these webinars, through our coaching, through different training and facilitation. So please don't think that this ends here. Y'all need to go home, not homework, but dive into this at your own pace, at your own speed, really enjoy it and take it away, because then it sets you up for that next thing. And I know that the next few webinars are going to be amazing. And I can't wait to also be in there viewing them with y'all. And I know you guys have some great facilitators coming up. So I'm excited now to answer any questions that may be out there, and I'll hand it back over to Miss Bree.
Thank you for that, Nico, and thank you for ending it with that activity. I think that, again, whether you spend an hour on it or 6 months, I really think that there will bring some value to you, not only you, but the people around you. So I think that this is a great activity to do with your colleagues as well as your small group of friends, so that it can be the foundation and lead you into some decisions that you all have to make as a collective. So I think that that's an excellent activity. I was screenshotting away, so I will be making sure that I incorporate this into my reflection time and my homework for my development. I also thought about another question when we were going through this activity. Once you formalize that personal code of ethics, ask yourself this: what does your personal code of ethics say about you? I'm not sure if Nico mentioned that question, but I think that is something else to kind of drive home who you are and what those ethics say about you. So I really think that that is an excellent activity. So thank you again for that, Nico. I wish we had time to dive in and do that right now in this moment, but I did have some questions that were submitted to me throughout our time together. together. So I will jump in with those. So one person asked in an interview, how should you ask the employer about their code of ethics and where they originated from?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I used to actually work with Safe House doing interview prep and job prep training. And I would tell you, I think just asking that, I think that an organization would really respect and be open to a conversation with somebody who's saying, hey, I want to understand more about our code of ethics and where we stand and also where those came from. Naturally, I would suggest HR is the best place to start with that conversation. But I think if you're coming to it with an open mindset and just saying, hey, I'd really like to understand more about that, I think just really putting it out there as simple as that, it would be perfect. I know as an entrepreneur, but also as somebody who's worked in many organizations, I've had that conversation a few times, and it's always been handled really, really well by people in leadership positions above me.
Thank you, Nico. And I did have one more come in, and I know you touched base on this a little bit before going into that activity, but if you could expound on that. So when you're faced with an ethical issue at work, who should you consult with? I know you mentioned HR, but what are some other people that would be able to help you guide you in that decision?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is a bit of a loaded question because obviously there's so many scenarios that could exist out there. And I would say if you're looking at, something that's infringing rights, right? ADA policies, equal opportunity policies, things like that, I would still suggest that you go directly to HR because they're going to be most equipped to handle that. But I also think about, the person taking a box of pens, right? If you work at BIC, maybe that's not a big deal. But if you work somewhere else, you probably are not supposed to just be stealing full boxes of pens. I think that there's a few courses that you can take. I think the first one is modeling with your own behavior, and when appropriate, respectfully confronting individuals if something's making you uncomfortable and having that conversation. Now, of course, if you don't feel like you're in a position or you don't have the relationship where you feel comfortable addressing that, then absolutely, I think that you should talk to your immediate supervisor about what the best course of action is, and always presenting it as a collaborative effort and really trying to reconcile and really trying to improve that based on what issue has arose, right? So I think those are your two best options. And of course, too, just knowing who your support network is at work. If you have people that you're close with, between that group, you may have the resources internally to handle that situation. But if you don't, surely somebody in that group knows the next best appropriate person to elevate a request for help from.
Thank you, Nico. And I think that is, why it is important to do the personal code of ethics with your employees, with your colleagues, and friends, because again, it's setting that foundation and it's helping you to have these conversations early on, and it's helping you to identify who your support is, because there inevitably will be a chance that you will have to rely on these individuals. So thank you for that response, Nico. And knowing your support at work, I think that is most definitely key. But we want to thank you all for spending a little bit of your lunch hour with us today. If you did it before your lunch hour, it is greatly appreciated. We will make the recording of this presentation available on our Facebook page within the next 48 hours. If you want us to email you a copy of today's resources, please drop your email address in the chat and I will be following up with you within the next 48 hours. Our next webinar is going to be February 23rd, the month of love. We are going to be talking about passion and purpose in the workplace and how to get back to that. So the title of that webinar is How to Fall in Love with What You Do again. So just another reflection activity. And I think that this personal code of ethics, if you do that activity, that the February webinar will be the next opportunity to kind of hone in on what your personal code of ethics were, to matching that to your passion and to your purpose at work. So we look forward to seeing you again on February 23rd at 11 a.m. Thank you again, Nico, for all of the advice and information that was shared today. And we look forward to a great 2023 series, and we will see you all next month.